The smell of cedar and old oil is my sanctuary. In my workshop, the world shrinks to the space between my hands and the piece of wood on the lathe. Every curve, every grain tells a story. I was shaping a block of maple, feeling the hum of the motor vibrate through the concrete floor, when the FedEx truck crunched up my long gravel driveway. I didn't think much of it. Probably just a shipment of tungsten carbide blades I'd ordered from Germany. I wiped my hands on a rag, the scent of sawdust clinging to my flannel shirt, and met the driver at the door. He handed me a crisp, heavy envelope. It wasn't from Germany. The return address was a high-end graphic design studio in Soho. My daughter's name, Chloe, was printed below it. Back in the workshop, I slit it open with a marking knife. Inside wasn't a wedding invitation. It was a bound booklet printed on paper so thick it felt like arrogance. The cover read, "The Chloe and Derek Nuptial Experience, a contribution portfolio." I felt a cold stillness settle over me, the kind that precedes a storm on a calm sea. I flipped through the pages. It was an itemized bill. No, not a bill. A list of demands, presented as a glossy lifestyle magazine. Bridal party pre-wedding retreat, Ibiza, Spain, $85,000. Couture and accessory sourcing trip, Milan, Italy, $62,000. Wellness and rejuvenation spa package, Zurich, $38,000. Initial deposit for Bora Bora Overwater Bungalow Honeymoon Suite, $85,000. Total, $270,000. My eyes scanned the numbers, but my brain was processing something else entirely. For 26 years, I had provided for my daughter. The best schools, a trust fund her mother Eleanor insisted on, a life free of the hardships I'd known. I hadn't seen her much since she'd left for Yale and fallen into Derek Vance's orbit. Our calls were short, strained. She saw me as a relic. A simple man who worked with his hands, the owner of a mid-sized Connecticut construction company. Bidrock Solution. Solid, dependable, boring. At the back of the booklet, tucked into a small paper sleeve, was a handwritten note on the same heavy cardstock. The handwriting was Chloe's, but the words were not. "Dad, Derek and I have decided on an intimate ceremony for our closest circle only. We know how much you'll want to be a part of our happiness, so we've put this together for you. It's a chance for you to contribute in a meaningful way. Be thankful I'm letting you spend the money. Love, Chloe." I read that last line twice. Be thankful I'm letting you spend the money. Something in my chest didn't break. It solidified. It turned from flesh and blood into cold, reinforced concrete. The grief I still carried for my wife, the dull ache of my daughter's distance, it all vanished, replaced by a profound and chilling clarity. I looked around my workshop, at the precise rows of tools, the half-finished projects, the blueprints for a downtown skyscraper pinned to a corkboard. This was my public face, Frank Miller, the quiet builder. The man who wore work boots and drove a Ford F-150. But rich people, especially new money pretenders like Derek Vance, have a fatal flaw. They judge the book by its cover. They see a flannel shirt and assume a simple mind. They see a construction company and think of dirt and gravel, not of the complex web of leverage, logistics, and ruthless negotiation required to raise a tower of glass and steel from a hole in the ground. They never see the architect of their ruin until the walls are already coming down around them. I picked up the glossy portfolio. I didn't tear it. I placed it carefully on my workbench. Then I walked over to the heavy steel door at the back of the shop, the one that looked like a closet. I entered the code on the keypad, and the door hissed open. Inside wasn't a closet. It was a different world. A soundproofed office with a bank of monitors, encrypted servers, and a single immaculate desk. This was the real headquarters of Bedrock Solutions. My company doesn't just build things. Sometimes, for the right clients, we tear them down. I sat down in the leather chair, the chill of it seeping through my jeans. I looked at the picture of my late wife, Eleanor, on the corner of the desk. He heard our little girl, Ellie, I whispered. He turned her against her own father. He thinks he's taking my money. He thinks he's won. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile my foremen see right before a multi-million-dollar project gets back on schedule by any means necessary. It was the smile that meant someone was about to learn a very, very expensive lesson. Derek Vance wanted $270,000 to fund his fantasy. I was about to make him pay for it with his reality. The house was too quiet. It had been for 5 years, ever since I lost Eleanor. It was a big colonial in Greenwich, the kind of place she'd always dreamed of. She filled it with light and laughter and the smell of baking bread. Now it was just rooms, empty spaces that held echoes. I walked through the living room, my boots silent on the Persian rugs she'd picked out. On the mantelpiece was a photo of Chloe, maybe 7 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade. Her face was sticky with cotton candy, her smile so wide it looked like it might split her face in two. She was wearing a silly plastic firefighter's helmet I'd won for her at a carnival game. She adored me then. I was her hero, the man who could build anything, fix anything. Where did that girl go? After Eleanor's cancer took her, a chasm opened between us. I buried myself in my work. It was easier to manage concrete and steel than the gaping hole in my life. I thought I was protecting Chloe by being strong, by providing. Instead, I created a vacuum, and Derek Vance was the perfect man to fill it. I remember the first time she brought him home for dinner. He walked in wearing a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He had the perfect hair, the perfect teeth, the perfect Wharton MBA story. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, a practiced, calculated gesture. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Miller," he'd said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "Chloe has told me so much about the empire you've built. Truly an inspiration." Empire. I run a construction company. We pour fondation. We raise steel. We don't build empires. The word felt slimy in his mouth. Throughout dinner, he was flawless. He complimented Eleanor's portrait, asked intelligent questions about my business, and doted on Chloe in a way that made her glow. But I saw things. I saw the way his eyes scanned the room, not with admiration, but with appraisal, like an auctioneer valuing the furniture. I saw the fleeting flicker of impatience in his gaze when I told a long story about a difficult project in the early days. He wasn't listening. He was waiting for his turn to speak. In his eyes, they were the eyes of shark, calm, empty, and constantly moving. I felt a cold dread in my gut. This boy was a predator, but Chloe was so happy, so alive in his presence. She looked at him with the same adoration she once reserved for me. If I had pushed, if I had voiced my suspicions, I would have driven her away completely. So I did the worst thing a father can do. I said nothing. I chose a fragile peace over a necessary war, and in doing so, I handed my daughter over to the enemy. Now, standing in the silent house, the glossy bill still feeling heavy in my memory, I saw my failure with brutal clarity. This wasn't just Derek's greed. This was the result of my absence. He hadn't stolen my daughter. I had let her go. The note. "Be thankful I'm letting you spend the money." Chloe might have held the pen, but the arrogance, the dismissive cruelty, that was all Derek. He was testing me, poking the bear he thought was old and sleepy. He saw me as an open wallet, a stepping stone to the Miller family trust that Eleanor had set up. He thought the wedding was his finish line, the moment he secured his prize. He had no idea. The wedding wasn't his finish line. It was my starting gun. I walked back to my workshop, the echoes of the house fading behind me. The quiet grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. I wasn't just going to get my daughter back. I was going to dismantle the man who took her, piece by piece. I was going to show him what it really means to build an empire and what happens when you try to take a stone from its foundation. He wanted to see my money? Fine. I was going to show him. I was going to show him exactly what it could do. The air in my hidden office was cold and still. I took a deep breath, the smell of filtered air a stark contrast to the sawdust and oil outside. This was where Frank the Builder ceased to exist, and another Frank took over. This was my real work. Bedrock Solutions is known publicly for its high-end commercial construction. We build bank headquarters, corporate campuses, luxury condos. What our clients in the Fortune 500 know is that our true specialty is a bit more nuanced. Sometimes a competitor gets aggressive. Sometimes a partner turns out to be a snake. Sometimes A problem arises that can't be solved in a boardroom. That's when they call me. My team doesn't use threats or violence. We use information. We find the cracks in a foundation, the structural weaknesses in a life or a corporation, and we apply precise, overwhelming pressure until the entire edifice collapses under its own weight. We are architects of ruin. I picked up the encrypted satellite phone on my desk and dialed a single number. It rang once before a calm, gravelly voice answered. No greeting. Marcus, I said. Frank, he replied. Marcus was my right hand. A former U.S. Marshal who got tired of the bureaucracy but never lost his taste for the hunt. He's the man who finds things people don't want found. I have a new project, I said, my voice low and even. In-house. Personal. There was a slight pause. In the 15 years we'd worked together, I had never used that designation. Understood, Marcus said. What's the scope? A full structural analysis leading to a controlled demolition. Target is a holding company, Vance Premier Holdings. Principals are Arthur Vance and his son, Derek Vance. Derek Vance, Marcus repeated, a hint of recognition in his voice. Chloe's fiancé. That's the one, I said, my tone leaving no room for discussion. I want everything, Marcus. Every dollar they've ever made, every deal they've ever cut, every secret they've ever kept. I want to know where they buy their coffee and who launders their shirts. I want a full financial, social, and psychological blueprint. This is a Category 1 priority. Nothing else matters. Consider it done, Frank, he said. The line went dead. I swiveled in my chair and turned to the blank whiteboard that covered one entire wall. I picked up a black marker. In the center, I drew 2 boxes. In the top one, I wrote Arthur Vance. In the one below it, Derek Vance. I drew a line connecting them. Then, off to the side, a smaller box. Chloe. I drew a dotted line from Derek to Chloe, a fragile, temporary connection. For the next hour, I worked, my mind a whirlwind of strategy. The $270,000 wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. It was a display of dominance, a way for Derek to show Chloe how thoroughly he controlled her father. Paying it would be an admission of defeat. Ignoring it would be seen as weakness. Both were unacceptable. My response had to be disproportionate. It had to be absolute. It couldn't be a slap on the wrist. It had to be a public execution. The plan began to form in my mind, elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its execution. It would have 3 main pillars, like the steel supports of a skyscraper. Pillar 1, financial ruin. I wouldn't just cut off their money. I would use their own greed to drain them dry, leaving them with nothing but debt and regret. Pillar 2, social obliteration. I would turn their dream wedding, their grand debut, into Greenwich society, into a spectacle of humiliation so profound it would become a local legend. Pillar 3, the awakening. This was the most delicate and most important part. I had to get my daughter back, not by force but by choice. I had to shatter the illusion Derek had so carefully constructed, forcing her to see the man, not the mirage. This couldn't be me telling her she was wrong. It had to be her discovering the truth in the most undeniable way possible. I stepped back from the board. It was covered in lines, arrows, and questions. A complex web of interconnected fates. To an outsider, it would look like chaos. To me, it was a blueprint. Derek Vance had sent me a bill for a party. I was sending him the invoice for his life. 48 hours later, Marcus walked in my office. He didn't knock. He never does. He placed a slim, black tablet on my desk. He looked tired, but his eyes had the sharp, predatory gleam they got when a hunt was going well. You were right to be suspicious, Frank, he said, his voice a low rumble. The Vances aren't just empty suits. They're a black hole. I picked up the tablet. The screen glowed to life, displaying an encrypted file. The Bedrock Solutions logo, a stylized B and S forming a fortress, pulsed for a moment before opening a detailed intelligence report. I started reading, and with every line, the cold purpose within me sharpened to a razor's edge. The Vances were not old money. Arthur Vance's father was a used car salesman in Queens. Arthur had tried his hand at a dozen failed businesses before stumbling upon his true talent, convincing people to give him their money. Vance Premier Holdings was a classic Ponzi scheme, just dressed up in a nicer suit. They targeted middle-class professionals, doctors from Hartford, dentists from Stanford, lawyers from New Haven, people with respectable savings and a desperate desire to feel like they were playing in the big leagues. Arthur was the patriarch, the voice of steady wisdom. Derek was the front man, the handsome, Wharton-educated prodigy who could sell salt to a slug. Their MO was simple. They'd taken money, promising exclusive access to off-market real estate ventures. For the first year, they'd pay out impressive, consistent dividends, using new investors' money to pay off the old ones. They'd create a frenzy. People would mortgage their homes, drain their retirement accounts, borrow from family to get in on the action. The Van Cess lived lavishly off the top, their lifestyle the best possible advertisement for their success. But the report showed the cracks. Marcus had gained access to their internal accounting. The scheme was becoming unstable. The inflow of new money was slowing down, and the outflow to early investors was growing. They were underwater, and they were getting desperate. They need a massive infusion of cash. Marcus said, verbalizing my thoughts. At least 10 million, probably more, just to stay afloat for another quarter. And Derek's marriage to Chloe was supposed to be the bailout. I finished. The pieces clicked into place. The trust fund Eleanor had left for Chloe was substantial. Once married, Derek would have exerted his influence to have her invest it with his father. The $270,000 bill wasn't just arrogance. It was a probe, a test to see how easily the old man would part with his cash. I scrolled further. Marcus had dug up something even better. A list of their victims. Not just names and numbers, but stories. A pediatrician who had lost his children's college fund. A retired couple who had invested their entire nest egg. A young widow who had trusted the Van Cess with her late husband's life insurance settlement. This was no longer just about my daughter. This was about justice. The Van Cess weren't just liars and thieves. They were parasites, hollowing out the lives of good, hard-working people. My eyes fell on one particular file. It was on Derek. He had been engaged twice before, both times to daughters of wealthy, but not stratospherically rich, businessmen. Both engagements were broken off suddenly. In both cases, the women's families suffered mysterious financial setbacks shortly after. There were no official complaints, just whispers of private settlements, of families too embarrassed to admit they'd been duped. He was a serial predator, and Chloe was next on his list. "Marcus," I said, looking up from the tablet. My voice was dangerously quiet. "I have what I need. It's time to start pouring the foundation for their new reality. What's the plan?" "Arthur Vance is desperate for cash," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "We're going to offer him the deal of a lifetime. A lifeline he can't possibly refuse." I turned to the whiteboard and drew a new box, labeling it St. Anne's Development, LLC. An entirely fictitious entity I just created in my head. A shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. St. Anne's, I explained, is developing an ultra-luxury, off-the-grid resort. It's the kind of project that billionaires fight to get into. It's exclusive, it's untraceable, and it promises an obscene return on investment. Marcus nodded, already understanding. "And we're going to give Arthur a chance to get in on the ground floor." "Exactly," I said. "We're going to dangle the $10 million he so desperately needs right in front of his face. He'll be so blinded by greed and relief, he won't see the hook." The hook was that St. Anne's Development would require him to pool all his available capital to meet the minimum investment threshold. He would have to drain every last dollar from his Ponzi scheme to seize this imaginary lifeline. He would be handing me the shovel to bury him. The next week was a blur of focused, relentless activity. My workshop fell silent. The half-finished maple bowl sat on the lathe, collecting a thin layer of dust. My world was the cool, quiet air of my hidden office, the glow of the monitors, and the intricate architecture of my plan. Pillar 1, the financial trap. I handed the creation of St. Anne's Development, LLC to a team of lawyers in Zurich who owed me a significant favor. Within 72 hours, it was a ghost. A perfectly legal, utterly untraceable entity with a prestigious offshore address, a glossy and completely fabricated portfolio of past successes, and a bank account in Grand Cayman that was as deep and empty as the Van Cess promises. The next step was the bait. Marcus, using a cutout, a disgraced but brilliant Wall Street analyst we kept on a quiet retainer for situations like this, made contact with Arthur Vance. The approach was subtle. Not a direct offer, but a leaked rumor. A whisper in the right circles about a once-in-a-generation opportunity. As expected, Arthur's desperation made him reckless. He chased the rumor like a starving dog chasing a piece of meat. After a few days of feigned exclusivity and reluctance from our side, our analyst graciously arranged a call between Arthur Vance and the CEO of St. Anne's Development. Me, using a voice modulator that made me sound like a bland, mildly bored European financier. I laid out the deal. A minimum buy-in of $12 million for a 25% stake in a resort project valued at over $1 billion. I sent him a prospectus that was a masterpiece of corporate fiction, filled with architectural renderings of impossible villas and financial projections that would make Midas blush. I told him the window of opportunity was closing in 5 days. He was practically salivating on the phone. The hook was set. Now I just had to wait for him to swallow it. Pillar 2, the social mind. While the financial trap was being set, I moved on to the wedding itself. Derek and Chloe had chosen the most exclusive country club in Greenwich, a place with a waiting list a decade long, a bastion of old money and quiet power. It was the perfect stage for their triumph. And for their downfall, Marcus's team got to work. They didn't contact the club directly. Instead, they approached the key vendors one by one. The celebrity florist flown in from L.A., the Michelin-starred caterer, the sought-after wedding planner who coordinated everything. The approach was always the same. A discreet representative from a philanthropic trust would explain that a secret benefactor, an old friend of the Miller family, wanted to give Chloe the wedding of her dreams as a surprise. The benefactor would cover all expenses, upgrade every package to the most extravagant option available, and pay a hefty premium for absolute discretion. The only condition was that the Van Cess were not to be informed. It was to be a gift, revealed on the day. Money talks, and the figures we were offering didn't just talk. They sang opera. One by one, the vendors signed non-disclosure agreements and accepted our payments. The deposits the Van Cess had paid were quietly refunded to them, disguised as accounting errors or sponsor credits. They thought they were getting the deal of a century, completely unaware that their control over the event had evaporated. I now own my daughter's wedding. Every flower, every canopy, every note played by the string quartet belonged to me. I was the ghost in their machine, the master puppeteer pulling the strings of their perfect day. Pillar 3, the emotional trigger. This was the hardest part. Hurting Chloe was the last thing I ever wanted to do. But the slow poison of Derek's influence was already killing the girl I knew. I had to administer the antidote, even if it was painful. A surgeon's cut to save the patient. Marcus had retrieved a mountain of data from the Van Cess lives. Hidden among terabytes of financial records was a gem, cloud backups from Derek's phone. It included audio files, recordings of his calls. He was arrogant enough to record his conversations, probably as a way to remember the details of his various cons. I spent an entire night listening to them, my stomach twisting with each lie. And then I found it. A call between Derek and his father, made just a few days after Chloe had sent me the $270,000 bill. I sat in the dark, listening to Derek's smug voice. The old man hasn't even responded yet. He's probably sitting in his dusty workshop trying to figure out how to sell a few more birdhouses. He has no idea what's coming. Arthur chuckled. Just keep the girl happy, son. Once that ring is on her finger and we have access to her trust, we can finally plug the holes in the dam. After that, we'll slowly convince her to invest the rest of the Miller fortune. The naive daughter of some old contractor won't even see it coming. Don't worry, Dad, Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. She's completely under my spell. She believed me if I told her the sky was green. The old man is a relic. His time is over. It's our time now. I saved the recording. I had my trigger. I commissioned a master craftsman in New York to build a custom music box from burled walnut. It was an exquisite piece of art, but it wouldn't play music. I had its delicate mechanical components replaced with a high-fidelity audio player and a small, powerful speaker. The recording of Derek and Arthur was loaded onto it. Alongside the box, I prepared a portfolio. Not a glossy demand for money, but a simple, leather-bound folder. Inside were copies of the Van Cess real bank statements, showing their accounts draining to zero. The lawsuits from Derek's previous fiancées, which had been quietly settled. A list of the families they had ruined with their Ponzi scheme. This was Chloe's wedding gift. The truth in a beautiful box. All the pieces were in place. The traps were set. The actors were ready. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on the final act. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding. I was in my workshop, not working, just sitting in the quiet when my burner phone vibrated. It was our cutout, the analyst. "He's in," the analyst said, his voice tight with excitement. Arthur Vance just initiated a wire transfer. $12,150,000. He liquidated everything. Pulled money from accounts I didn't even know he had. "He's all in, Frank." I felt no elation, just a grim sense of finality. "Confirm when the funds have cleared," I said, and hung up. An hour later, a notification pinged on my encrypted laptop. The account for St. Anne's Development LLC in Grand Cayman, which had contained nothing but air for the past week, now showed a balance of $12,150,000. I watched the number on the screen. It represented the lifeblood of the Vance family's criminal enterprise. It was the money they had stolen from doctors and retirees, the capital they were counting on to keep their house of cards from collapsing. And Arthur Vance, blinded by greed, had just handed it to me. I initiated a second transfer. The full amount was moved from the St. Anne's account to another, even more secure account, one I had set up specifically for this purpose. A trust designated for the Vance Creditor Restitution Fund. The money was no longer mine. It was waiting to be returned to its rightful owners. The Cayman account was now empty again. St. Anne's Development LLC ceased to exist. The lifeline I had offered Arthur Vance had been pulled away, and he was now in free fall, with no idea the ground was gone. The first domino had fallen. That evening, I got a call from Chloe. It was the first time she had initiated a call in months. Her voice was bright, almost giddy. "Dad, you'll never guess what happened," she said. "Derek's father just closed the most incredible deal. We're celebrating. Derek is so happy. He said this sets us up for life." I leaned against my workbench, the cold steel of comfort. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, my voice even. "I know we've been distant," she continued, a rare note of softness in her voice. "But I really want you to be happy for us. This is the start of everything." "I've always wanted you to be happy, Chloe," I said. And I meant it. It was the truest thing I'd ever said. "Oh, and about that portfolio I sent, just forget about it," she said with a little laugh. "A drop in the ocean now. Consider it unsent." "I will," I replied. We said our goodbyes, and she hung up. She thought she was calling me from the pinnacle of her new life. She had no idea she was calling from the edge of a cliff. The Van Cess thought they had secured their future. They didn't realize they no longer had one. The trap was sprung. The bait was taken. Their greed had been the weapon of their own undoing. All that remained was the fallout. And it was scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours at the most beautiful wedding Greenwich had ever seen. The night before the wedding was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the whiteboard with its web of names and arrows illuminated by a single desk lamp. The plan was in motion, a complex piece of machinery that no longer needed my input. All I could do was wait. A strange, sort of melancholy settled over me. There was no victory in this, only a grim, necessary duty. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my daughter's life. The shrapnel would hit her harder than anyone. I was saving her from a predator, but the rescue would feel like an attack. I looked at the picture of Eleanor. Her smile was kind, her eyes full of a warmth that I missed like a phantom limb. "I hope you'd understand, Ellie," I whispered to the photograph. "I hope you'd know I'm doing this because I love her. Because I can't stand by and watch her be destroyed." The silence of the room was my only answer. I thought about calling Chloe. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, warning her what was coming. But I knew it would be a mistake. She wouldn't believe me. She would see it as a desperate, jealous attempt to ruin her happiness. She would warn Derek, and the Van Cess, while still financially ruined, might find a way to spin the narrative to paint me as the villain. No, she had to see it for herself. The truth had to come from Derek's own mouth, from the undeniable reality of his crumbling world. The lesson had to be absolute, leaving no room for doubt. At 3 a.m., I picked up the satellite phone and made one final call. It wasn't a Marcus or any of my operatives. It was to a contact I had inside the SEC's enforcement division, an old friend to whom I occasionally fed anonymous, high-quality tips. "I have a gift for you," I said, my voice digitally altered. "Vos premiers. It's a Ponzi scheme on the verge of collapse. The principal, Arthur Vance, just wired the last of his operating capital to an offshore account that has since vanished. He's insolvent. The investor calls are going to start Monday morning." "How solid is this information?" the contact asked, his voice suddenly alert. "I'm sending you a data packet," I replied. "It contains their internal books, account numbers, and a complete list of their investors. It's a slam dunk. I'd recommend moving quickly. Freeze their assets. All of them. There's a risk the principals might be a flight risk." I sent the encrypted file and disconnected the call before he could ask any more questions. That was it. The final pin was pulled. The authorities would now be involved. The Van Cess weren't just going to be broke and humiliated. They were going to face federal charges. There would be no escape, no recovery. I shut down my systems and walked out of the office, locking the heavy steel door behind me. I stood in my workshop, the scent of wood and oil feeling foreign now, like a memory from another life. The first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. It was Chloe's wedding day. The sun was rising on the happiest day of her life. She had no idea it would end in darkness. And I, her father, was the one bringing the night. I didn't go to the wedding. My presence would only complicate things. Instead, I sat in my quiet living room, a single glass of bourbon on the table next to me, untouched. Marcus was my eyes and ears. He was on site, posing as a club employee, giving me a quiet play-by-play through a secure earpiece. "The place looks incredible, Frank," Marcus murmured. "Flowers everywhere. Looks like they bought out a whole rainforest. Guests are arriving. Old money, new money. Everyone who's anyone in Fairfield County." I pictured the scene. The manicured lawns of the Greenwich Country Club rolling down to the Long Island Sound. The women in their pastel dresses, the men in their summer suits. The air thick with expensive perfume and the quiet hum of polite, powerful conversation. "Chloe's arrived," Marcus reported. "She's in the bridal suite. Looks happy, radiant." A pang of guilt shot through me, sharp and hot. I pushed it down. This was for her. This was the only way. "The Van Cess are working the room," Marcus continued. "Arthur is holding court by the bar, looking like the king of the world. Derek is with his groomsmen, all of them looking like they stepped out of a hedge fund catalog." I waited. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. My instructions to the SEC contact had been precise. At 3:45 p.m., Marcus's voice came through my earpiece, a new edge to it. "Here we go, Frank. The wedding planner is approaching Arthur." She looked stressed. I could almost hear the polite murmurings, the forced smiles. "He's pulling out his wallet," Marcus said. Now he's frowning. He's trying another card. It's been declined. The planner is whispering something to him. His face. Frank, he just went pale as a ghost. The first crack in the facade. The club, on my instructions, had tried to run a final authorization on the Van Cess card for incidentals. A card that was now worthless. "Arthur is on his phone," Marcus reported. "He's walking away from the crowd, toward the terrace. He looks frantic. Now Derek's phone is ringing. He's looking at it, annoyed. He answers it. He's listening, and the smile has just vanished from his face. The SEC had moved. At 3:45 p.m. on a Saturday, a federal judge had signed the order. Every known asset of Arthur and Derek Vance, bank accounts, credit lines, brokerage funds, was frozen solid. "It's starting to ripple through the room," Marcus said. "People are whispering, checking their phones. A few of the guests are Vance's investors. They must be getting the alerts from their banks. The atmosphere of celebration was curdling into one of confusion and alarm. The planner just informed Derek that none of the final payments have been received from his family, Marcus said. He's arguing with her. He's turning red. And now, for the final act. The gift is on its way up to the bridal suite, Marcus said. A courier, dressed impeccably. He's walking through the chaos like he's invisible. I held my breath. This was it. The moment of truth. He's at the door, Marcus whispered. He's knocking. Chloe's maid of honor opened it. The box has been delivered. A long silence followed. I could hear the distant, muffled sound of a string quartet playing Vivaldi, a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding disaster. I pictured Chloe in her white dress, surrounded by her friends, opening the beautiful walnut box I had sent her. Frank! Marcus's voice was tense. Something's happening in the suite. I can hear shouting. Derek is running up the stairs. He just burst into the room. I closed my eyes. The bomb had just gone off. Now, there was only the blast radius. I learned the details later, pieced together from a tearful Chloe and a grimly satisfied Marcus. Chloe was sitting at her vanity, her friends fussing over her veil, when the courier knocked. The maid of honor accepted the heavy, beautifully wrapped box. There was no card, just a simple tag that read, "For Chloe, to see the truth." Intrigued, she placed it on her lap and carefully undid the silk ribbon. She lifted the lid of the polished walnut box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a piece of jewelry, but a simple, leather-bound folder and what looked like an old-fashioned music box key. Confused, she opened the folder. The first page was a bank statement for Vance Premier Holdings. The balance read, $0. The next was a court order from the SEC detailing the asset freeze. Then came the newspaper clippings about Derek's former fiancées, the hushed-up scandals. And finally, a list of names, the retired teachers, the doctors, the widows, and the amounts they had invested with the Vances. Her friends are chattering, confused. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? Chloe's hands began to tremble. Her fairy tale was dissolving into a nightmare right in front of her. She looked back at the box. The key. She picked it up and wound the small mechanism on the side of the box. But it didn't play a gentle melody. Instead, a voice filled the silent room. Derek's voice. Smug, arrogant, and cruel. The old man is probably sitting in his dusty workshop trying to figure out how to sell a few more birdhouses. He has no idea what's coming. Then Arthur's voice, equally chilling. Just keep the girl happy, son. Once that ring is on her finger and we have access to her trust. The naive daughter of some old contractor won't even see it coming. The room was dead silent. Chloe's friends stared at the box, their faces masks of horror. Chloe herself was frozen, her face ashen, the color draining from her cheeks. The beautiful illusion of her life, the man she loved, the future she had dreamed of, it was all a lie. The recording played on, each word a hammer blow against the fragile glass of her reality. She's completely under my spell. She'd believe me if I told her the sky was green. At that exact moment, the real Derek burst through the door. His face was a thundercloud of fury and panic. His eyes weren't on Chloe, but on the box in her lap. What the hell is that? Turn it off, he snarled, his voice no longer the smooth, charming purr she knew, but a raw, ugly rasp. He lunged for the box, but Chloe recoiled, clutching it to her chest. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him with adoration. She was looking at him with dawning, sickening comprehension. She was seeing the monster behind the mask. "Did you say it?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Did you say those things?" His composure shattered completely. The panic and rage boiled over. "It's your father," he screamed, his face contorted. "He's trying to ruin everything. That old fool couldn't stand to see you happy." He grabbed her arm, tried to wrench the box from her. "Give it to me." His touch, which she had once craved, felt vile. The cruelty in his eyes, the naked greed on his face, it was all real. The recording wasn't a lie. It was a prophecy. And with that, something inside Chloe snapped. The spell was broken. She looked at the man in the $1,000 tuxedo, the man she was about to marry, and she didn't see her prince. She saw the villain of her story. The call came an hour later. The Vivaldi had long since stopped playing. I picked up the phone on the first ring. Dad, it was a broken whisper, a child's voice in the dark. I'm here, Chloe. Can you come get me? She choked out, followed by a racking sob. I'm on my way, I said. When I arrived at the country club, it was a scene of utter chaos. Guests were fleeing as if from a sinking ship. News vans were already setting up at the gates. I bypassed it all, using a service in trance I knew from a project I'd managed there years ago. I found her in the bridal suite. It looked like a storm had passed through. A vase of white roses was shattered on the floor. Her veil was torn. She was sitting on the floor in her magnificent wedding dress. Now, just an expensive costume, with a walnut box in her lap. She was alone. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her face a mess of running mascara and raw pain. She didn't say anything. She just got up, walked over to me, and collapsed into my arms, sobbing as if her heart was breaking. And it was. I held her, my own heart aching with a fierce, protective love. I had done this. I had broken her heart to save her life. The months that followed were an ordeal. The Van Cess downfall was spectacular and public. The media called it the wedding crash. They were arrested, charged with fraud and racketeering. The list of victims I had provided to the SEC ensured a swift and damning case against them. Derek, in a desperate attempt to save himself, tried to blame everything on Chloe and me, painting a picture of a manipulative father and a scorned, unstable daughter. No one believed him. The recording from the music box, presented as evidence, sealed their fate. Using the $12 million I had recovered, I worked through a team of lawyers to anonymously compensate the Van Cess victims. It wasn't everything they had lost, but for most of them, it was enough to get back on their feet. They never knew where the money came from. It was enough for me to know that the scales of justice had been, in some small way, balanced. My relationship with Chloe was in ruins. She moved back into the house, but we were like two strangers orbiting each other in the quiet rooms. She was polite but distant. The pain of my deception was a wall between us. I had saved her, but I had also proven that her entire world was a lie, and that I had been the one to pull the trigger. Trust, once shattered, is the hardest thing to rebuild. I didn't push. I gave her space. I returned to my workshop, to the familiar comfort of wood and steel. One chilly autumn afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I was working on the lathe, shavings of cherry wood piling up at my feet. The door to the workshop creaked open. It was Chloe. She didn't speak. She just stood there for a long moment, watching me. Then, she walked over to a workbench, picked up a piece of sandpaper, and took the half-finished maple bowl that had sat there since this all began. She sat on a stool across from me and began to sand the wood, her movements slow and deliberate. We worked in silence for over an hour. The only sounds were the hum of my lathe and the soft, rhythmic rasp of her sandpaper against the wood. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a forgiveness. It was something else, something quieter and maybe more real. She was helping me build something new. I looked at my daughter, her face focused, her hands steady. The naive girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and survived. A woman who was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. My demolition project was complete. I had torn down the hollow, rotten structure of lies that surrounded her. And now, on the cleared ground, on the bedrock of a hard-earned truth, we were finally ready to start building again. Together.